I'm really sad that you're still relevant. I just I'm sad. I'm very sad.
So am I. I really am sad that I'm relevant. Look, I'm not what's relevant. The idea is relevant, and it's going to be relevant for as long as we believe that there's more than one race of human beings on the face of the earth. That's how long I'll be relevant.
I once, when you did your thing, was it 50 years ago? Was this when you
Yep,
first? It was
yep.
like 50 years ago.
1968. Right.
When you did your exercise 50 years ago, it was stunning. And then you did it again and you had the same results, and that you had to do it again. And now we sit here, and I have moved towards this thing. You gave me melanemic, and I'm also now questioning everybody that calls up and talk, or any guest that comes on as a white person, as a white man, as a white woman. I keep asking them, what does it mean to be white? And they stumble and they stammer and they cannot tell me. But I think we now have to, I think we should reimagine policing. I think we should eliminate this notion of whiteness. I think that would serve us all well.
Okay. Are you willing also to eliminate the notion of blackness?
Yes.
Yes, that's exactly what we must do. We have to get over the idea that people come in white and black. People do not come in those colors. People come in shades of brown. And we've got to start realizing that white and black, those two words were used during the Spanish Inquisition to decide who deserved to die. If you were white, you didn't have to die. If you were black, you were going to be gone, because they couldn't tell what your religion was by looking at you. So they set upon skin color and white and black to decide who deserved to die. Now, we've been doing that since the late 1400s. I challenge anyone who insists on being called white and black, if you're going to use the terminology and the language of those times, then you should use the communication and transportation that they used at those times. And all you guys will come to work wearing knee breeches and powdered wigs, and all you women will walk to work wearing corsets that make your waist no more than 18 inches around. Now, if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to live the way they did in the 14th and 15th century, stop using the language of the 14th and 15th century. It didn't make sense then, and it makes absolutely no sense now. And you need to know that the word race, to mean a specific group of people, came out of France in 1580. It was that recently that people were called had a race. This is ridiculous. This has to stop.
What will it require? Because when I ask the question, what does it mean to be white? What's white culture? People stumble, but they don't want to give it up.
Hey, you can't give up something you've never had. White culture is a combination of all the cultures of all the different colored people on the face of the earth. We take from every other culture what will make us happy, make us dance better, make us sing better, make us feel better. We will steal from other cultures and claim that it's ours. We do it all the time. You know it, and I know it. We'll take the best out of every other culture and call it white. It's time to give up the idea of whiteness. The rightness of whiteness has been alive from during the 15th century till now. When are we going to learn? You're talking about the police. Why do we have these problems with the police department? Because we do a bad job of educating members of the police department. Just like we do a bad job of educating every other person that goes to the private, public, and parochial schools in the United States of America. We are still teaching that Columbus discovered America, when in fact, people from Africa discovered this continent and every other landmass on the face of the earth between 200,000 and 10,000, between 20,000 and 10,000 years before Columbus was a gleam in his father's eye. It's time to stop teaching this lie and start teaching the truth.
Okay. Can we clone you? Can we clone you? We need to
absolutely
send you all over.
Absolutely, because this isn't something I came up with in my head. This is something I learned from reading a whole lot of stuff. Everybody needs to get the book Sapiens by Harari. It is just fantastic. And everybody has to have the book Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization. The man who wrote that book studied what came out of the Nile Valley. And did you realize that 4,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ, people in the Nile Valley, the Nile is a river in Egypt, people in the Nile Valley were doing cataract surgery with metal instruments 4,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. That means 6,000 years ago. Think about that. You didn't learn that in school. And why didn't you learn it in school? Because if it
Because
wasn't right, it must not be right. If it wasn't right, it
well,
isn't right.
because this system in order for it to continue, it has to demonize and erase all contributions that came before the emergence of Europeans.
But it doesn't.
They
But
also
it doesn't.
say that
And no,
anything
no,
pre-Greek and
no,
Rome is prehistory. They say that's prehistory.
no, that isn't prehistory. That is real history. When you have Black History Month, you start with 1690, when the first Blacks were brought here as slaves. No, the first Blacks came here 10,000 years before Columbus was born. We've got to start teaching history as it really was, instead of as we want it to have been. There were Blacks here when Columbus got here. There were Blacks here first. So it's time to put a stop to this whole nonsense. Either that or stop calling it history. Stop calling it history.
What do we call it?
I'm with you.
Nonsense? Yeah.
We better call it nonsense. That's exactly what we're teaching in the schools in this country today. We're teaching that Columbus discovered America, and that's a flat out lie. You can't, Thor Heyerdahl said, you can't discover a place where people are already living. They discovered it before you got there. And there were people here, and we called them Indians because Columbus was lost. He was trying to get to India. He thought he had reached India, so we called them Indians. They weren't Indians. Every group of people on this continent at that time had a name for the people, and every one of them called themselves a name that meant the people, which is what they were, and which is what they are. But they didn't come up out of a hole out of the ground. They came from Africa, just like you and I did.
All right, Jane Elliott has arrived, y'all.
Has arrived.
JaneElliott.com. You have arrived. You have arrived, Jane Elliott, my cousin.
I'm so grateful for you and all the work that you do and what you speak on. So it's just a privilege to be here in your presence.
Well, let's get something straight here. You have forgotten more since breakfast than I will ever learn about racism. The only reason people listen to me is because I'm white. I can say things that no person of color dares to say. If I had been brown or black the day I did the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise, I'd have lost my job for sure, and I might have lost my life in 1968. So make no mistake about it. When some people say to me, "Oh, Jane, you're our hero," I say, wait just a minute. Turn and look at the nearest Black woman and realize what she has been through in order to survive in the United States of America. And that's another thing. We've got to stop calling this country America. Americans.
I'm sorry.
Why you're laughing at that.
I'm laughing because it's so much truth being said in such a short span of time, and I'm loving it. Continue, please. Why do we call this America?
Because we're ignorant. We're ignorant and we're arrogant. You have to realize that every citizen of every country, from the northernmost point of Canada to the southernmost point of South America, is an American. Those of us who live in this 48 contiguous states, Alaska, Hawaii, and the islands off the southeastern coast of the United States, are members of the country called the United States of America. And the most important word in that title is united. Now, we had for 4 years a so-called president, well, he wasn't so-called president, who was trying to turn us into the divided states of America. And he came pretty close to doing it, and we're still working at trying to get back to where we are the United States of America. If you're going to refer to this country, call it the United States of America or call it US. US spells us. And that's about all of us in the United States of America. We're the only country like this. People need to realize how hard it has been to keep this country united from the beginning. And right now we're in danger of losing our united status. We've got to put a stop to this nonsense, and we have to stop it now.
866-801-8255. Jane Elliott, icon. I think the hero status, and I hear what you're saying, and I do appreciate everything. But you seem to be one of a handful of people. There are people that are doing it because it's lucrative right now. You have a lot of anti-racist white folk out there producing books and going and giving speeches. But you've been doing this, like you said, before it was popular, when it was dangerous, and it was still dangerous for you as a white woman, because the woman that left her couch in Michigan to go down and help people vote, Luozo, I think is her name, got shot in the head. So she's not here anymore. Viola Luozo. So I'm sure you've gotten death threats. I'm sure people call you race traitor. I'm sure all of that. So that, you're glossing over, that it's easy for you, because it's not easy for you to talk about the things that absolutely would dismantle the power structure in this country in the way in which you do so.
Well, but you see, I have no choice. I'm an educator. I'm not a teacher. Don't ever call me a teacher. I'm an educator. And the word educator comes from the root duc dus, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who is engaged in the act of leading people out of ignorance. And the number one problem in the United States of America is not racism. It is self-imposed ignorance. The truth is out there. The truth is out there. If we would go after it, we could do away with racism if we could convince white people that it is in their own best interest. Now, it's going to be much harder and easier in the next 10 years because of the hole in the ozone layer, which keeps getting bigger and bigger. More and more sunlight is allowed to enter our environment, and more people who are white, they call themselves white, are that light color, don't have protection from their damaging rays of their sun because they don't have enough melanin in their skin. They're dying in increasing numbers from cancer, skin cancer. You need to realize that very shortly now, and within the next 10 years, you're going to see melanemic people running after to catch up with and to mate with people who are melanaceous and melanotic. And I'm waiting for that day, and I'm going to laugh all the way to the grave. This is going to happen because it's going to be a matter of self-protection, and it's going to be a matter of, you want to stay alive, you want your children or your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren to stay alive. You can't change the sunlight, but you can change your ignorance about skin color, and you can decide that you're going to have children of color as your descendants. It's absolutely essential. Do you realize that only 15 to 18% of the human beings on the face of the earth are classified as white? Did you know that?
I knew that we were the global majority. I knew that.
And always have been. But in the United States, demographics say that we white folks, so-called white folks, we melanemic people are losing our numerical majority. By the time you're my age, white people will be a numerical minority in the United States of America. And that's the reason for the Oath Keepers and the KKK and the 3%ers and all those silly, pale, stale males running around trying to guarantee that they are going to be on top of the heap. Well, they aren't. So they might as well stop now, because people are going to understand that this is what they're doing, is trying to tell us something that isn't true, that they are superior and that they will be in the numerical majority forever. Why do you think Donald Trump closed all the Planned Parenthood clinics? Because he thinks that the only thing that they offer in Planned Parenthood clinics is abortions. And he is aware, because he read Ben Wattenberg's book, which he wrote in 1987. 1987, Ben Wattenberg, a brilliant Jewish male, wrote a book called The Birth Dearth. Now, don't run out and buy that book, because you can't get it. It's out of print. But when he wrote it, the first time he wrote it, he said the only thing the major problem in the United States today is there aren't enough white babies being born. He said, if we don't do something about this and do it now, white people will no longer be a majority in this country, and this will no longer be the white man's land. Now, that was in the first paragraph of the first page of that book. I was shocked and disgusted and thought, well, what is this all about? So I finished the book. And the second thing he says is, there are 3 things we can do to solve this problem. Number 1, we could pay women to have babies, as they have been doing in Western European nations for years. And these are his remarks, not mine. Then he says, unfortunately, we'd have to pay women of all colors to have babies, so we don't want to do that. He said the second thing we need to know is that 60% of the fetuses that are aborted in this country are white. If we could keep that percentage alive, that would solve our birth dearth. There's another thing. And he said the second thing he said we could do is allow more legal immigrants into this country. And he says, unfortunately, the vast majority of those who want to come to this country are people of color, so we don't want to do that. And then we could stop abortion, and that would help us to regain our numerical majority. It was a horrible book, and he got horrible, awful remarks about it because it's a racist text. So he wrote the book, and used tables and graphs and charts to say what he wanted to say without saying it in black and white. Now, Benjamin Disraeli said, there are three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Well, to prove it, yeah. So to prove his point, Ben Wattenberg used statistics, so he wouldn't have to say in black and white what he said in black and white in the first book. You can't get a copy of that first book. If you could find one published in 1987, let me know and I'll pay whatever I have to get it, because I want it in my hands again. Nobody believes it unless they see it in black and white. It was the most astounding and astonishing and appalling thing I have ever read. And this is from a brilliant, brilliant man.
Two things can be true. Jane Elliott is here. Tonya Pinkins is here. We're going to take some calls. The number here is 866-801-8255. You're listening to the Karen Hunter Show. I believe, Jane Elliott, that people are willing to die than to give up their whiteness. I think they're willing to take their progeny and their future right along with it, and they're willing to blow up the whole entire world and take everybody with them to maintain this supposed power dynamic. I don't have the hope that they would, come to their senses and say, well, we got to stop this.
Well, but once again, that's self-imposed ignorance. And you need to realize one of the major differences between melanemic and melanaceous melanotic people. When melanemic people come into a new environment, they immediately adjust the environment to fit their needs. When melanaceous and melanotic people come into a new environment, they immediately adjust their needs to fit the environment. Now, maybe when these evangelicals get this into their heads, maybe they'll change their behaviors. When they find out that Jesus was an Ethiopian Jew and looked a whole lot like those black men who are walking down the street around you, maybe that will change their minds. But you see, we pale faces don't want to kneel to someone who doesn't look like us. So we have recreated Jesus in a way that there is somebody that we can worship. That's the kind of absolute insanity that has been happening in this country, in the world, for the last about 4,000 years. It's time to put a stop to it.
Did you ever read that the Iceman Inheritance book? Do you know anything about that book?
A long time ago.
Yeah, what'd you think of it?
I can't even remember. I've read so many books between.
I was going to ask.
It was a whole theory about being in cold environments, making you hostile, sort of genetically making you become hostile to both your environment and to other people because you're always competing for resources. So that was his. But
if that really worked, look at the number of brown-skinned people who have made fantastic contributions to the history of humanity. That theory is way, way out there and it doesn't work. I have watched people of color take strides and make differences that, in spite of all the ugly things that we teach about them in the schools in this country, they have succeeded in spite of it. So don't tell me that it is something genetic. No, I watched the second, third year I did the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. It was filmed with 16 little white students. The principal gave me my class roll that year and said, Miss Elliott, these kids aren't going to learn to read. Pass them on, get them out of here. Nobody else has been able to teach them to read, and neither will you. And I thought, well, and this is a man I admired. So I went to the office and I looked at the cumulative files, and every one of these kids had high math scores and low reading and spelling scores. So I knew I was teaching. He had handed me a group of students who couldn't read because their teachers didn't know how to teach them to read. I know how to teach the child who has that kind of reading problem. There's no doubt in my mind, but what every one of those kids was moderately to severely dyslexic. They came into my room reading at the first grade level. They left my room 9 months later reading at the fourth grade level, and some of their independent reading level was sixth grade. Now, the difference was they hadn't gotten any smarter. Their IQs hadn't risen, but they had somebody who knew how to teach to their difference. We don't do that in the schools today. We put them in groups, the robins and the sparrows and the wrens, instead of saying, wait, and it happens all the time. It's enough to drive you nuts. And then we teach them as if they all learn the same. No, Thomas Edison was dyslexic. Henry Ford was dyslexic. Somebody said to him after he had made billions of dollars and lots of cars, why don't you learn to spell? He said, I can hire several secretaries to do my spelling for me. He didn't have to learn to spell, but those students in my room that year learned to spell. And those kids who weren't supposed to graduate from high school, they all graduated except one who was killed in an alcohol-related accident 2 weeks before graduation. One of them became a lawyer. He became a lawyer. So see, I didn't succeed with all of them. He was just a lawyer, but he was still he is still a lawyer to this day. And one of them still works at Mayo Clinic. One of them became a junior and senior high school principal. They weren't supposed to amount to anything. They weren't supposed to graduate from high school. I learned about teachers' expectations. I expected those kids to do better because I knew how to teach them in a way that they would do better, and they lived up to my expectations instead of down to my expectations. They're successful today because they learned how smart they really are. I doubt that we allow Black males particularly to find out how smart they are. Because if we did, we wouldn't have had we've had more than two. Well, we've had what somebody has written a book called The First about Barack Obama, our first Black president. He wasn't our first Black president. Abraham Lincoln was our first Black president. He was a one.
She is doing that today, y'all. She did it.
He was a Melungeon. He was part Black, part white, and part Cherokee Indian. Come on, people, let's get over it, and let's get over it now.
All right, Jane Elliott, a couple of things. How do you teach? What was your methodology for reaching the children that you brought in that were dyslexic? I'm curious for those. There are a lot of educators listening. We're gonna have another teacher on later on. What was your method?
It's the Orton Gillingham Phonics method. And you have a card pack there are only 85 sounds in the English language, and you teach them all the spelling of all those sounds. And you use a card pack every day. The first day of school, you separate them by using the card pack. You go through the knowns and then you separate the ones they don't know. And then the second day, you teach to that unknown pack. And by the end of the year, they are all reading at or above the fourth, if you're in teaching third grade, at or above the fourth grade level, absolutely no doubt.
Why did we remove phonics? You know what? As you're talking, I was angry when I started the show. Now I'm like super angry because we removed the things that would help us not be as ignorant as we are. And now they want to remove actual history from the schools, and they want us to teach things like people were migrant workers, the enslaved people. And it's bananas that we are at
a song anymore.
Hey, but you need to read that words are the most powerful weapon devised by humankind. Yes. We use words to keep people in their place all the time. And what you have to do is send kids to the dictionary and see that white is the color of purity and goodness, Black is the color of savagery and evil, and then say to yourselves, we're not going to use those words on kids anymore in this classroom. When you come into this classroom, you are a child of color, every one of you. And what we're going to do is advise your parents to trace your DNA back as far as it can go. And if they trace their DNA back as far as they can, they're going to find out, and you're going to find out, that every student in your classroom has in their DNA, a percentage of their DNA came from Africa, because we all came from the same place and we're all members of the same race. Until we get over the idea of more than one race, based on skin color, which is only your body's adaptation to the natural environment over the centuries. God didn't make you white. And God isn't an old white man with a long gray beard that looks like Charlton Heston playing Moses. God is a spirit and has neither color nor gender. Get over it, people. And Jesus was a Black man and lived in a very dark-skinned country. And Mary didn't look like Mary in the movies with blonde hair and blue eyes and fair skin. She too was Black. People, it's time to admit, because it's a matter of self. If you're going to live, you have to admit the truth. And the truth is that you and I are 30th to 50th cousins. I'm a 30th to 50th cousin to every person on the face of the earth. Now, you may not want me for your cousin, but you have no choice. That's the way it is, because we all came from the same place. And if you don't believe that, you need to get Robert, what's his name? Anyway, The Myth of Race, Robert Sussman. Get Robert Sussman's book, The Myth of Race, and read it. It will blow you out of the water when you realize that we have been lied to consistently. The education systems are lying to us consistently because you can't teach what you don't know. No. And now let's deal with critical race theory, CRT. Everybody's upset over critical race theory. Forget it, people. For me, CRT stands for Curriculum Respecting Truth. Now that's what we want, is curriculum respecting truth. And we could have it. And then we have these boys who are into the replacement theory. Oh, I laugh when I see walking around. They aren't good. Jews will not replace us. There are three things we need to teach people right now, starting today. Number one, without blacks, there would be no whites. We all started out from the same group of people. Without blacks, there would be no whites. Without Jews, there would be no Christians or Muslims, because both of those religions base their faith on the Jewish faith. Get over it, folks. And without women, there would be no men.
Okay,
Simple. All right. So you're not retiring until racists retire. So you're not ever
That's right.
retiring.
That's right. Well, hey, racism is not something that we were born to. Racism is something that we adapt to. Racism is something you learn. You are not born a racist. You need to realize that nobody is born a racist. We are taught how to be racist from the prenatally. Black women and what we call black women and white women get different treatment in the delivery room. You know that, and I know that. And I've heard too many black women say to me, I would have had a child, but the doctor said my child was in too bad shape when it was born, and I couldn't take it home. They would take care of it, and they took care of it. I've heard many women, black women, tell me that, because you aren't even safe when you're in your mother's womb if your mother has the wrong color skin in this country. You know it, and I know it, and they know it. I don't make this up. I couldn't make this stuff up. I would be ashamed to make up things like this, but I am ashamed of those who deny it, or who cooperate with it, or who know what's happening and do nothing about it. I'm ashamed that we built a wall on the southern border of the United States in order to keep those brown-skinned people out, because Donosaurus T. Rump said brown-skinned people reproduce too rapidly. That shames me greatly. I'm ashamed that we are closing Planned Parenthood clinics so that white women will be less able to get an abortion. White women will get abortions with or without Planned Parenthood. You need to know that they did before Planned Parenthood, and they will now, because they will make that decision for themselves, and they will not allow somebody else. And so will black and brown women. You know that. They did before, and they will now. There's no way you can force a woman who has a brain cell to just go along to get along with the idea that all white women particularly are made for is to produce more white babies. That isn't what we're for. We are here to do a lot of things, but that's only one of the things that women do. And we're on the verge of turning white women into slaves. You make a person carry a body for 9 months and then expel that from their body, and then for the rest of their lives, they hear that child crying in the night. You need to realize that we are asking women to do something that a man can't do, and given the choice wouldn't do.